Hi, I'm Ursula Wake.
And I'm John Atack, and this is Lyrical Wax.
It is. And today we're doing an episode on the American poet Marge Piercy. And the reason we're doing it this week, because we will be putting it up in March, the reason we're doing it this week is her birthday is on the 31st of March.
Happy birthday, Marge.
Happy birthday, Marge. And many more, hopefully. She was born in 1936. So, yes, she's
Probably only
entitled
got
to a
another
happy...
20 or 30 more birthdays to go.
Indeed. So she's more famous in the States than in the UK and perhaps other parts of the world as well. I came across her quite a while ago. Her themes are very often things to do with love, sex, her Jewish family, Jewish heritage. She writes quite a lot about gardening and animals, and having been a social activist and a vocal feminist, that comes into a lot of her poems as well, sort of very specific socio-political feminist poems. I first came across her. She's got a very special place in my affections as Marge Piercy. I came across her in the late 90s at a time in my life where things were very difficult. I'd sort of embarked on a life that then came to a very abrupt, it kind of skidded to a halt, because my husband and I, we'd sort of always lived in cities, and then we moved to the countryside, and we had this dream of how we were going to earn money, and then also we'd got a bit of land and we were going to grow it. But he became very ill very soon after we moved, and it never happened. And one of the things, and Marge Piercy, I discovered her poetry, and she became a fantasy neighbour of mine. She was somebody who, when I read her poetry, it felt like she was kind of living the life I was supposed to be living. That sounds, I'm not that kind of resentful, petty person, but there was something about that. I thought, if she lived next door and we could, and we could have conversations about what it's like to have your hands in the earth and how fantastic it feels growing plants, and we could have cats just wandering around the place, and we could discuss it. And she also has this air comes across, I think, through her work and through what I knew about her as a person, of somebody who lives what I think of as both neck up and neck down in equal measure. And in fact, in an autobiography I've read recently, she uses that phrase. I've not been able to re-find it, but she values the intellectual and the sensual in equal measures, and I think of it as neck up, neck down. Yeah. And I thought, this is a woman I can do business with. I can relate to.
Lots of necking.
And also a sort of a sense of, although sort of very intellectually engaged and politically engaged, something quite wild about her as well, and I love that balance as well. And overall, she was just somebody who I just needed at that point in my life. I really needed this woman. So when I discovered, and it was this book that I discovered in the library, where the one time that I would take my toddler daughter into town, if it wasn't to do with medics and hospitals, it was to go to the library and shoot, and then I would sometimes go off and have a look for things for me as well as reading stuff with her. So, and this book, Written in Bone, was one of the most memorable pieces that I found during that time. So she does definitely, for me, she entered my affections and has never really left. And another aspect that I really liked was that my feminism kind of aligned with hers. I felt as though because it felt as though feminism for some people had got stuck in a men, what are they good for? Absolutely nothing thing.
The anti-male. Spare rib feminism, as it's sometimes called.
Yeah, and which felt like a real and I was never. That was a route that I could never go down, and I still sort of struggle with the various aspects of that. And Marge Piercy is a woman who, she's been married 3 times. Her current marriage, I think, started in the 80s, and she has always very much wanted intimacy, an intimacy that is broad and deep and sexual and intellectual and domestic, and she doesn't seem to align herself in any way with the kind of feminism that I've just been talking about. And so that was an element of her that I could relate to as well. She says, the autobiography that I was mentioning that I'd been reading is Sleeping with Cats, and it came out about 20 years ago. And she says towards the end of her relationship with her husband, Ira Wood. So Ira Wood is also a writer, and they've written some things. They've written a play and a novel, perhaps more than that, together. But she says, "No day passes that I am not grateful. I live with a man who finds me attractive, who loves me, who looks out for me, whom I can trust, who I can care about passionately and deeply. That means a great deal to me. Peace in the centre of my domestic life. It isn't that we don't disagree or fight or become irritable with each other. We're volatile and strong-willed people. But we are each other's best friend and each other's proper mate. We continue to interest each other." And so, yeah, I think, and a lot of her adult life, she's had relationships with men and wanted that. So I just wanted to underline that was another thing that I thought, yeah, I can align myself with this. She agrees with me. Not I agree with her. I don't agree with her. She agreed with me.
She knew what you're thinking.
That's right. She aligned with my type of feminism. So, this first poem that I'm going to read is...
And it's like our relationship, only there isn't that much fighting involved in our relationship as yet.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll build up to that.
But there is, yes, it is interesting, isn't it?
We are able to disagree.
Yes, and we're both strong-willed people.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And she says somewhere else that they sometimes feel that the other person is trying to impose their will, and so they resist, so they kind of get into a kind of... I thought, yeah, I can recognise that. But yeah, you both... Why not? Why not?
Yeah, we need to be opinionated. It's a good thing.
Ask me for anything else. Patience is dun-coloured. The mousy, the confusing fall warbler that eats the worms, the nourishment of beans and whole wheat, the slow rain the crops need that grows mould on the mind. Watson has patience and muddy boots, not Holmes with his cocaine needle. Old dogs snore their patience. Cats pace. Big cats cut patience from the herd and run it down panting for hot breakfast. Patience is a game you play in a damp, chilly cabin while the river roars and the path is too soggy to hike out. Patience is a tick waiting on a grass blade for you or your dog. Patience is the joy of oysters. Try me for energy, passion, hard work, loyalty, hope, but patience is the spider's virtue, and I am the glinting, biting fly.
Wow, that's brilliant.
It's great, isn't it? And yeah, I do like a full-blooded person. So...
I am full of blood, in case you were wondering. So...
Yes. Next poem.
Yep, speaking of blood. This is the first salad of March. Thinnings of the rose, Chinese cabbage, lettuce, sorrel, cress, nipped ends of herbs, returning. Mint and thyme, violet leaves poking up in clusters like armies of teddy bears, emerging ears first from the earth. The Egyptian onions that multiply underground, the spears of garlic shoots, The mixture huddles, skimpy, in the bowl. The salad explodes in the mouth. Green Roman candles. It is succulent, dainty, intense. It is crisp as new money. It lights up my blood and urges fur from the backs of my hands. I want to roll in leaves that are still lumps on twigs. First salad, strong and fierce and plaintive. Love at age 5. Spring makes new the taste of lettuce, fresh as a tear. Sorrel. I haven't had sorrel for years. I love sorrel.
Oh, that's good stuff. Yeah.
Used to sneak into the garden when I was 5 years old and find the sorrel and pull the leaves off. There you go. That's don't tell my dad.
And those the green, the thing that I've always thought of when I read that poem is that astonishing green of the first shoots in spring that's sort of then just muds over a little bit by midsummer, but just those brilliant greens. And even when there's just tiny little sprinkled, a few little shoots, you can still put them together in a bowl, and you've got some salad.
Green Roman candles.
Green Roman candles. Wonderful, yeah. This next one is called The Morning Half-Life Blues. Girls buck the wind in the grooves towards work, in fuzzy coats promised to be warm as fur. The shop windows snicker, flashing them hurrying over dresses they cannot afford. You are not pretty enough, not pretty enough. Blown with yesterday's papers through the boiled coffee morning, they dream of the stop on the subway without a name, the door in the heart of the grove of skyscrapers. That garden where we nestle to the teats of a furry world, like in mounds of peony-eating grapes, and need barter ourselves for nothing, not by the hour, not by the pound, not by the skinful. That party to which no one will give or sell them the key, though we have all thought briefly we had found it drunk or in bed. Black girls with thin legs and high necks stalking like herons, plump girls with blue legs and green eyelids and strawberry breasts, swept off to be frozen in fluorescent cubes. The vacuum of your jobs sucks your brain dry and fills you with the ooze of melted comics. Living is later. This is your rented death. You grasp at specific commodities and vague lusts to make up, to pay for each day, which opens like a can and is empty, and then another. Afternoons like dinosaur eggs stuffed with glue. Girls of the dirty morning, ticketed and spent, you will be less at 40 than at 20. Your living is a waste product of somebody's mill. I would fix you like buds to a city where people work to make and do things necessary and good, where work is real as bread and babies and trees in parks, and you would blossom slowly and ripen to sound fruit.
Wonderful.
Like that. You will be less at 40 than at 20. And I don't think that's so true now, certainly. This would have been written in the 70s. I've not been giving dates for these. But that sense that what a shame. And it's not true. A human being, as they grow towards 40, towards middle age, should not be less. And yet, actually, there was, I can relate to that sense that as a female, you're supposed to be, very young.
And it obtains for men as well, because, I was watching Adam Curtis's Can't Get You Out of My Head this week, and he has some interviews with Tupac Shakur over the years, and you realise that, and some kids in gangs. I read a lot about gangs and the transformation of gangs in the 70s and 80s from, we used to fight on the streets, fist fights, now there are guns, and we kill each other. And the expectation that life will be short, which is a different point to the point she's making. Because these men won't exist at 40. They won't live to be 40. If they do, they'll probably be incarcerated for some ridiculous petty condition often. So that sense, and I think especially in American culture now, where a culture that is absolutely riven with gangs and with the pimp ho drug dealing culture that's bled through America, where the expectation of women has so long been throughout the world that they'll be 18 years old, and that's their prime. And of course, as we understand in the rightness of our age, no, you're just growing up,
Yeah, and you should get more, become more, and be allowed to become more. And I think, as I say, I think we've moved past that sense of women always becoming less in middle age. And I think certainly at the time it was written, and I would say in general, I hear what you're saying about gangs, but beyond that, I think there has been a tendency towards, men reach their prime sort of later, and there is greater status, greater understanding, greater knowledge of the world. And I think what she was writing about there was that very narrow understanding of what it is to be female, and the narrow sort of strictures of life. Yeah.
Restrictions.
Yes. You're right. Yes.
And I think that part of that became very evident in Hollywood, that you were either a movie star and you basically your career would be ended somewhere around about 37, 38 years old. And that women like Jodie Foster and Julia Roberts and other women in Hollywood fought to say, because you'd either be that or you'd be an old lady. Those were the two choices. And
Margaret Rutherford.
Who was always an old lady. She was born that way, and a wonderful actress. But that sense that and we still do have it in the consumer culture, the perfect age is 18, and you're going, that's a rotten age to be. It's the worst time of your life, and looking that way, the mutton dressed as lamb concept, rather than, the elegance that comes with maturity, which we have, of course.
Yes, of course we do.
Is called to have without holding. Learning to love differently is hard. Love with the hands wide open. Love with the doors banging on their hinges, the cupboard unlocked, the wind roaring and whimpering in the rooms, rustling the sheets and snapping the blinds that thwack like rubber bands in an open palm. It hurts to love wide open, stretching the muscles that feel as if they are made of wet plaster, then of blunt knives, then of sharp knives. It hurts to thwart the reflexes of grab, of clutch, to love and let go again and again. It pesters to remember the lover who is not in the bed, to hold back what is owed to the work that gutters like a candle in a cave without air, to love consciously, conscientiously, concretely, constructively. I can't do it, you say. It's killing me. But you thrive, you glow on the street like a neon raspberry. You float and sail, a helium balloon, bright bachelor's button blue and bobbing on the cold and hot winds of our breath as we make and unmake in passionate diastole and systole the rhythm of our unbound bonding, to have and not to hold, to love with minimized malice, hunger and anger, moment by moment balanced.
Mm.
She's rather good, isn't she, really?
I think she is rather good, yeah. And she had, in her earlier life, I don't think it's true of her current marriage, in her earlier life she had some open relationships, and part of that was extremely painful for her, actually. But I think Eve, to me, that works as a description of either open relationship or a relationship where you are just being generous to the other person. You want that broad and deep intimacy, and you have it, but it's not about, I think she uses the word, the clutch and the grasp. It's about allowing the other person what they need as well. And sometimes that is painful. Yeah, and sometimes it's difficult and hard work. And I liked that description of, it's sort of feel you've like muscled like wet plaster, but then actually, you can grow into it if you really, really try it. But if you work at it, and all of a sudden you've got muscles like sharp knives, they work. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
So this next poem I'm going to read is about ageing again, and about bodies, and rude word alert, there's a line about testes, using the word balls. Just thought I'd better warn you just in case.
Any cricketers among you, watch out.
Just in case you felt you needed to be warned. Cats like angels. Cats, like angels, are supposed to be thin. Pigs, like cherubs, are supposed to be fat. People are mostly in between. A knob of bone sticking out in the knee you might like to pad, a dollop of flab hanging over the belt. You punish yourself, one of those rubber balls kids have that come bouncing back off their own paddles, rebounding on the same slab. You want to be slender and seamless as a bolt. When I was a girl, I loved spiny men with ascetic grimaces, all elbows and words and cartilage, ribbed up like cast-up fog-grey hulls, faces to cut the eyes blind on the glittering blade, chins of Aegean prows bent on piracy. Now I look for men whose easy bellies show a love for the flesh and the table, men who will come in the kitchen and sit, who don't think peeling potatoes makes their penis shrink, men with broad fingers and purple figgy balls, men with rumpled furrows and the slightly messed look at ease of beds recently well used. We are not all supposed to look like undernourished 14-year-old boys, no matter what the fashions ordain. You are built to pull a cart, to lift a heavy load and bear it, to haul up the long slope, and so am I. Peasant bodies, earthy, solid, shapely, dark glazed clay pots that can stand on the fire. When we put our bellies together, we do not clatter, but bounce on the good upholstery.
We certainly do.
I like that. Yes.
And it harks back to this point of the perpetual 18-year-old of the consumer-driven society, that in fact these are children being idealised as a perfect form, whereas in fact, I far prefer your perfect form, a woman who is a woman as opposed to this kind of skinny sort of thing. And really, I was looking at, it was probably the Daily Mail online or something truly atrocious a few months ago, and down the right-hand column were all of these pictures of this woman with a six-pack, this woman with a six-pack, and I was just sort of, this just looks so strange to me. I mean, it looks strange enough to me when men have six-packs, but, the ideals that shift around in our culture, which is so uncomfortable, and so much about, keeping up with the Joneses or fitting with the fashion, rather than being yourself, being who you are, and enjoying what is.
Yeah, and I think ideals of beauty have always they've kind of, there's been an interweave of things to do with status and power. That's been an
Fat.
awful, yeah. So in most of human history, most people haven't had quite enough to eat, or certainly haven't had enough to eat, and therefore, yeah, that rotund figure gave status, and therefore that was something to look towards. And then certain things to do, a lot of it has been to do with power and status and money and the unattainable. So whatever is the most normal thing, that is not, it's not good enough. There's always something else, because you have to have something to aspire to, and that is true. I think it's true of other things in life, but the thing is that being attractive is something that, because everybody at some level wants to be attractive, it just becomes this universal thing that is important. Whereas I think if you look at well, are you intelligent enough? I think you're looking at something that isn't quite so problematic, because some people say, do you know what, I'm just fine as I am, I'm not even interested. I mean, don't necessarily have that curiosity, don't necessarily have that need to feel intellectual, and so therefore you're not looking at something that is so universally problematic. But I think when you're talking about something like your physical appearance, as soon as you face another human being, you are in some way aware of what your appearance is, and therefore you're talking about something that hits us much more deeply, I think, and becomes more deeply problematic when it's unattainable is what you're supposed to be.
And those stereotypes shift so much. I
Definitely
did a piece on my family channel about beauty through the ages from the perception of paintings. And if you look at the great Jan van Eyck, the painting that is called the Arnolfini Marriage, which is in the National Gallery in London, is I remember talking with one of the guards or whatever they are there, and he said to me, this is the most revered painting in the National Gallery. More people become obsessed with this picture than anything else, and there are amazing pictures in there, and you can see why. But the woman that we're looking at, and this is the 15th century, the 1400s, has a great big belly, and it was long thought that because she's pregnant. She isn't. This was the fashion at the time. The woman had to have a big belly. That was very important. And she has a very high forehead, with her hair pulled back from it, and looks quite odd by our standards. If you then look at photographs of Edwardian beauties at the beginning of the 20th century, great big things. In fact, the Victorians, of course, would add a bustle at the back to make a woman look as if she had a huge arse. Yeah. So these, and then somehow with the introduction of...
But then also incredibly corseted waists.
Yes.
So you couldn't breathe, and as soon as you had any reaction to something, you'd swoon.
And we hear about, my great aunts and my grandmother, who were born in the 19th century, they would talk about, and they were working class women, but they would talk about these corsets, and they would talk about fainting, and you'd always have smelling salts handy to bring a woman back from a faint. And because when I was a kid and read about this, it was like, women don't seem to do that anymore. But I didn't understand, what the corsets were doing to make this absurd hourglass shape. But I think probably with cinema after the First World War, people like Clara Bow and these new film stars, and I do wonder whether there wasn't some kind of gay inference in this, that men who were keen on boys were now looking to find women who looked like boys, and this became a stereotype that was pushed, and in the fashion industry, of course, became the 14-year-old heroin addict with the incredibly long neck. So these things come and go, but those ideals change so much.
They do. I think there's possibly something different going on with the flapper culture, though, because I wonder if, as a move away, so during the First World War and women's roles, they had to go to work and they couldn't have corsets because they had to have a proper life, but very safe compared to the men who were going to be cannon fodder. Well, safer than being in the trenches, probably. But their lives did change. And I mean, lots of, in the changes, social changes during the First World War were huge. And so people realised, we're not going to go back to the way it was. And that happened in all sorts of different ways,
Yes.
didn't it? And there were revolutions and blah, blah, blah across Europe. And one of the changes, I think, it is in women's fashion and beauty. And I think there's an interweaving of their own liberation. We're not wearing corsets anymore. We're not going to do this. We're going to wear shorter dresses because that is so much more practical. But then, of course, we've been wearing trousers in the munitions factories. And actually, crikey, without having to, you can walk around without having to pick your dress up. And then all the laundry involved with the pavement getting on your dress, all of that. And so shorter dresses, and not wearing corsets, but then wanting elegance as well. And I do wonder whether there's something about the interplay of, it's quite difficult if you're not going to have a corset, if you're going to wear a dress that is shorter and represents freedom, i.e. not but straight, so that's a representation of liberation, and a short skirt as well. Actually, if you've got large breasts and large hips, that's a very strange... I wondered if part of the move away from that shape is actually, it's if you're creating clothes for that liberation, then actually a slender figure, it sits much better on a slender figure. And also, if you've got shorter dresses, even if they've got tassels, and a lot of sort of liberation in terms of, instead of you must cover up your ankles.
Oh,
Instead of that,
if you're watching, please cover up your ankles while watching this.
Instead of that, dances like the Charleston and everything. These are my legs having a good time, and very different, and being very determined to do that. And dresses, even with the tassels or the beads hanging down, you could see a lot of leg. And I wonder if actually it was then, so yeah, but it looks, if you're going to have that much leg shown, then it looks a lot more elegant, and that dress looks a lot more elegant on that slender shape, which is sort of a very different way of looking at it. But I've always sort of wondered whether there's something, so it's a different kind of status and power going on. It's actually a move towards the status and power not being about, rather than women being looked at, it's about women doing things and wearing clothes that allow them to do that. And yet, oddly, as time's gone on, like you say, it's just become this must. Although it hasn't taken a straightforward thing, because if you the obvious Catherine Mansfield, have I got the right name? Jane? Who am I thinking of?
I don't know. Who are you thinking of?
Well, Marilyn Monroe, Catherine Mansfield. Who's the...
Jane Mansfield.
Jane Mansfield.
Not the New Zealand author.
I know, but isn't there a
Mansfield.
Catherine Mansfield as well?
Kathleen, the writer changed her
No, I'm
name.
not talking about the writer.
Jane Mansfield was the one with
yeah,
Jane
but there
Russell.
was a Jane Russell. That was the one I was thinking of. So Jane Mansfield, yes. So that was a time when you're definitely not looking at a slender, boyish figure.
Betty Grable, who's the greatest pin-up of the Second World War, who's almost forgotten now.
Yeah.
Strangely, that they are more ample. Rita Hayworth, Ava Gardner. There's Brigitte
Sophia
Bardot,
Loren.
Gina Lollobrigida, all of these women. So in the 20s, you've got this thing towards the flat-chested, boyish woman, which I think, Coco Chanel is very influential, because I think of the fashion designer, she's the first to say, no corsets.
Yeah.
But it's also the first time in history that the propaganda machine, rather than being focused on politics, has moved in the late 19th century to be about patent medicines. Companies like Eli Lilly, after the Civil War in the US, they are the people advertising. Then fashion. And, ultimately glamour magazines, pictures of women for men to look at. But I think it's in the fashion pages, and then Art Deco in the US becomes the style, and that presents a woman in a particular way. So all of these things come together and create an influence. And then after the Monroe, the 60s into the early 70s period, with Rita Hayworth, Ava Gardner, Joan Crawford, these more substantial women. There is then the move back, of course, via Twiggy
and the shrimp.
Jean Shrimpton. So, and that's all about Marge Piercy.
Yes.
And we probably better move back towards the topic a little bit. This is a poem called The Working Writer. I admire you to tantrums, they say. You're so marvellously productive. Those plump books in litters like piglets. You're an example to us all, they say. But not of what. Then the comments light on my face, stinging like tiny wasps. Busy, busy, rush, rush. Such a steamy, pressured life. Why don't you take a day or week off when I visit? I spend July at the beach myself. August I go to Maine. Martinique in January. I keep in shape Thursdays at the exercise salon. Every morning I do yoga for 2 hours. It would mellow you. Then I grind wheat berries for bread, weave macrame hammocks, and whip up a fluffy mousseline dress. Oh, you buy your clothes. I just don't know how you live, with weeds in the living room, piles of papers so high the yellow snow on top is perennial, books in the shower, books in bed, a freezer full of books. You need a cleaning lady or two. They cost so little. I saw a bat in the bedroom last night, potatoes flowering behind the toilet. My cats clean the house, I say. I have them almost trained. I work myself. In winter, we dig the potatoes. All year, we eat the books. Wonderful.
This next poem that I'm going to read again is about the beginning of a relationship. Trying to attract your attention without being too obvious. I am placing my body before you, like a bowl of apples, like a bunch of grapes. Where I am inside waiting. I am the fierce hollow. I am the wanting this body grows around. I love that. I am great. The wanting, and then the body is just sort of around the wanting, but it's the wanting that's important.
I mean, I absolutely love apples, but I like you a lot more. This is called In June, the young deer are almost tame. We'd met the two of them, young mates. She was the more curious, tame. The smell of oils and linseed drew her. Once I saw her standing behind a painter at the side of the sand road, looking over his shoulder like a tourist pausing. In the early morning, we often saw them, as we did this morning. He ran across the paved road by the dike. She followed, and the new station wagon, driven by a doctor with Georgia plates, came roaring over the hill, far too fast. He hit her so hard, she went high in the air, landed on his windshield, stumbled forward, then lay kicking. He paused, started away. I stood before him, flagging him down. But he would not get out. He drove off, left us with her. I knelt by her, still thrashing, the blood now blooming from her mouth, running in a brilliant stream. touch of fuchsia in the scarlet. I had to help her die. I cradled the beautiful head, eyes wide in terror. I closed the windpipe with my hands. She was bleeding so hard that my execution was fast. Within 2 minutes, she was still, and her open eye glazed over, and the sweet, tawny flank was still at last. She was the colour of my Siamese Arofa, whom I had to help to die 14 years ago. I could not let the vet kill her. She would have known. She could read our emotions like captions on a foreign movie. I think of an old man lying in a hospital bed, his legs cut off, his head smashed in, and the tubes and the machines keeping him from quiet. I have been close enough to death to know that there is a time when life is indistinguishable from pain, when you want to turn your face to the wall and pass through it, into fog that slowly lifts on the wind and goes into the air and the earth, each molecule becoming something else. There is a time to be other, but death can spring without warning. Pretext, the great thing that strikes in the middle of a morning, when the locust trees are hung with great honeyed bunches of sweet flowers to graze, when every leaf is still fresh and sweet, when the multiflora roses turn the sand roads into bowers of perfume. You smashed, and gasping with pain, me having to play Dr. Death, pressing your maiden throat in my shaking hands.
Yeah.
When Lucy and her brother were kittens, barely 10 weeks old, they caught a pigeon, and I came outside, and you could see this thing, see it into its chest, its heart beating. They ripped it open, and they were sort of looking at it, and that having to go and get a brick, and that having no choice but to do it. And also this line, I've been close enough to death to know that there is a time when life is indistinguishable from pain. And for the last 5 years of her life, my mother was, I looked after my mother, and she was at that point, for 5 years, she was in such awful pain. And whenever anybody came, any stranger came to the house, she'd ask them what they thought of euthanasia. That would be her first question. And she'd look at their startled face and say, I think it's a really good idea. So it meant that when she died, and she was 94 when she was died, and I was sat in the room with her when she died, watching the King's speech, curiously. And I realised that she'd died. And rather than weeping, because I dearly loved her, it was a relief. It was, the pain had become such that it was a passage into this, she'd say, fog that slowly lifts on the wind and goes into the air and the earth, each molecule becoming something else. Yeah.
And that sounds, I love that sense of relief in those words. There's some that lifts on the wind and just passes. I think, there is a point, and I may come to that point, where that is what you want, and it's a beautiful image of what you need and the time to go.
And my mother, who'd been a Sunday school teacher as a youngster and attended church until she was nearly 60 years old, pretty much every week. But in her last years, she would say that she was done. She didn't want an afterlife. She didn't want to go to heaven, and she didn't want to be reborn. She was perfectly satisfied. It had been wonderful, and she was over. Thank you very much. Which is somehow a very moving thing to share. And I have the same point of view. Couldn't care less. As long as we have a good time. That's all I care about, really. And we do.
Yeah.
We do.
And I think it is a wonderful thing, and a really important thing, if you can get there, to somebody used the phrase to grow into death, grow towards it when when you have to. I don't mean that it's a good thing at any time of life, but that acceptance and that, it's time. Thank you for having me, and I'm off. Yeah.
And we sometimes will see it in terminally ill children, that they have passed to a point of acceptance, which is quite remarkable.
Yeah, and I would say perhaps especially important at that age.
Yeah, and a serenity that is not usually seen in human beings. Bless them. Okay.
Right. So you've got your page open for your lesson, but
there's another one
in
of
the
yours.
middle. So the last one that I'm going to read. I'm aware there's a bit of repetition of theme. And so she's written so much. We could have chosen all sorts, but I happen to have chosen another one about bellies.
I like bellies. Bellies are nice.
And it's called Belly Good. And it starts with a phrase that you've pointed out a few times from the Song of Songs in the Bible. Your belly is like a heap of wheat. So this is how it starts.
And your breasts are two roe deers. So we've had a poem about a deer, so it all fits together.
Not
magically.
very breast-like, but nevertheless.
But a roe deer nonetheless.
Yeah. Belly good. A heap of wheat, says the Song of Songs, but I've never seen wheat in a pile. Apples, potatoes, cabbages, carrots make lumpy stacks, but you are sleek as a seal hauled out in the winter sun. I can see you as a great goose egg, or a single juicy and fully ripe peach. You swell like a natural grassy hill. You are symmetrical as a Hopewell mound, with the eye of the navel wide open, the eye of my apple, the pear's port window. You're not supposed to exist at all this decade. You're supposed to be flat as a kitchen table, so children with roller skates can speed over you, like those sidewalks of my childhood, that each gave a different roar under my wheels. You're required to show muscle striations like the ocean sand at ebb tide, but brick hard. Clothing is not designed for women of whose warm and flagrant bodies you are a swelling part. Yet I confess I meditate with my hands folded on you, a maternal cushion radiating comfort. Even when I have been at my thinnest, you have never abandoned me, but curled round as a sleeping cat under my skirt. When I spread out, so do you. You like to eat, drink, and bang on another belly. In anxiety, I clutch you with nervous fingers as if you were a purse full of calm. In my grandmother standing in the fierce sun, I see your cauldron that held 11 children shaped under the tent of her summer dress. I see you in my mother at 30, in her flapper gear, skinny legs, and then you knocking on the tight dress. We hand you down like a prize feather quilt. You are our female shame and sunburst strength.
And we don't want skinny, flat-bellied women to be upset by this, but it's just there are preferences, and for some of us the belly is the window of the soul. So this is a poem about a prayer, a Kaddish.
So it's a poem written in the form of a Kaddish, Jewish prayer. Yeah.
Jewish prayer. Look around us, search above us, below, behind. We stand in a great web of being, joined together. Let us praise, let us love the life we are lent, passing through us in the body of Israel and our own bodies. Let's say, Amen. Time flows through us like water. The past and the dead speak through us. We breathe out our children's children blessing. Blessed is the earth from which we grow, blessed the life we are lent, blessed the ones who teach us, blessed the ones we teach. Blessed is the word that cannot say the glory that shines through us and remains to shine, flowing past distant suns on the way to forever. Let's say, Amen. Blessed is light, blessed is darkness, but blessed above all else is peace, which bears the fruits of knowledge on strong branches. Let's say, Amen. Peace that bears joy into the world, peace that enables love, peace over Israel, everywhere, blessed and holy is peace. Let's say, Amen. And I believe that the word Amen means, so be it. And with
Peace
that,
over Israel would be wonderful.
wouldn't it be marvellous? Wouldn't it be incredible? But maybe one day. Can only pray for it, really. Make a Kaddish for it.
Yeah. So, happy birthday, Marge Piercy.
Yes.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm Jon Atack.
I'm Ursula Lake. Bye.
Bye-bye.